Did you know there's a house in New York where an entire family fled after only 28 days of living there? Can you imagine the terror they must have experienced to abandon everything they had invested in their dream home? Today we're going to delve into one of the most chilling and controversial cases in American paranormal history, the Amityville case of 1975. This is the true story behind the horror films that have terrified millions of people around the world. But I assure you that reality surpassed any fiction you've seen in the movies. On December 18, 1975, George and Kathy Lutz moved with their 3 children into a beautiful colonial house in Amityville, Long Island, New York. It was their dream house, spacious, elegant, and with an incredibly low price for the real estate market in the area. But there was a very sinister reason why the price was so tempting. Exactly 13 months earlier, in that same house, one of the most brutal crimes in New York history had occurred. Ronald DeFeo Jr. had cold-bloodedly murdered his parents and 4 siblings while they slept, using a .35 caliber rifle. 6 families, members systematically executed in their own beds without any neighbor hearing the gunshots. The Lutz family knew perfectly well what had happened in that house, but they thought they could overcome the traumatic past with the power of family, love, and some religious blessings. They hired a Catholic priest to bless the house before moving in. What they didn't know is that this decision would lead them to live 28 days of absolute terror that would change their lives forever and create one of the most debated paranormal cases of all time. From the first day, strange things began to happen. George Lutz, a skeptical and rational man, began waking up every night at exactly 3:15 a.m., the exact time when it's believed Ronald DeFeo committed the murders. It wasn't just a normal awakening, but he would get up with an inexplicable feeling of terror, as if something invisible was watching him from the shadows. Kathy began having vivid nightmares where she saw members of the DeFeo family walking through the house's hallways, bleeding and asking for help. But what do you think? Do you believe that such a horrible tragedy can leave an energetic imprint on a place? Let me know in the comments if you've lived through any similar experience, or if you believe places can retain the energy of traumatic events. The phenomena intensified rapidly. Temperatures in certain rooms dropped drastically without explanation, especially in the basement and in the room where the DeFeo parents had slept. George noticed that no matter how much he turned up the heating, these areas remained freezing. Doors and windows opened and closed by themselves, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed throughout the house during the early morning hours, as if someone was walking through the hallways dragging their feet. But the most disturbing thing was the smells. A nauseating stench of rotting flesh would suddenly appear in different parts of the house, especially near the stairs leading to the second floor. It was such an intense and repugnant odor that it made the entire family feel nauseous. The children, aged 5, 7, and 9, began behaving strangely. They talked to imaginary friends, woke up screaming in the middle of the night, and flatly refused to enter certain rooms in the house. The 5-year-old in particular insisted that there was an older man in his room who watched him while he slept. He described this man with very specific details: grey beard, sunken eyes, and a malevolent smile. When Kathy asked him to draw this man, the child made a drawing that disturbingly matched photographs of Ronald DeFeo Sr., the father of the murdered family. The physical manifestations escalated to a terrifying level. George began finding muddy handprints on the walls, especially around door locks. These prints appeared during the night and were always wet to the touch, as if they had just been made. Kathy would wake up with red marks on her body, scratches and bruises she couldn't explain. The marks appeared in perfect geometric shapes, as if they had been deliberately made by something that had precise anatomical knowledge. Appliances began operating by themselves. The radio would turn on at full volume in the middle of the night, always tuned to stations broadcasting religious music or programs about paranormal phenomena. The television constantly changed channels, always stopping on news about violent crimes or horror programs. It was as if something was trying to communicate with them through these devices, sending specific and disturbing messages. Have you ever experienced your electronic devices acting strangely without explanation? Tell us in the comments what was the strangest thing that has happened to you with technology in your house. The breaking point came when George decided to investigate the basement more thoroughly. He had noticed that the temperature there was significantly lower than in the rest of the house, and that his tools appeared moved from their place every morning. When examining the walls more carefully, he discovered a hidden room behind a brick wall. This room didn't appear in the original house plans and seemed to have been deliberately sealed. When he finally managed to open a small hole in the wall, a putrid and nauseating smell came out of the hidden room. It was the same smell they had been perceiving throughout the house, but concentrated and intensified. George later described that it was as if he had opened a tomb that had been sealed for decades. Inside the room, he found strange objects, melted black candles, symbols drawn on the walls that seemed to be from some type of ritual, and dark stains on the floor that appeared to be dried blood. The most disturbing thing of all was the discovery of small animal bones arranged in circular patterns around the room. They appeared to be from cats, dogs, and other small animals, and had been placed there deliberately as part of some type of ceremony. George realized that the DeFeo family had been involved in activities that went far beyond what the public knew about them. The situation became unsustainable when the entities began manifesting physically. George reported having seen shadowy figures moving through the hallways during the night. These figures weren't translucent like traditional ghosts, but were dense, three-dimensional shadows that seemed to absorb the light around them. When he tried to follow them, they would disappear upon reaching corners or fade away when coming into contact with light. Kathy had an even more terrifying encounter. One night, she woke up feeling that someone was touching her. Upon opening her eyes, she saw the figure of an elderly woman standing next to her bed. The woman wore a Victorian dress and had a partially decomposed face. Her eyes were completely black, and her mouth was open in what appeared to be a silent scream. The apparition remained there for several minutes, staring fixedly at Kathy before gradually fading away. The children also began having direct encounters. The oldest son reported that he had seen a girl his age playing in the backyard during the night. This girl wore a white dress stained with blood and beckoned him to leave the house and join her. When the boy approached the window, the girl would smile, revealing completely black and rotted teeth. What would you do if your children began telling you stories like these? Would you believe them immediately, or would you think they were just nightmares? Let me know in the comments how you would react to a situation like this. The Lutz family decided to seek professional help when the phenomena began affecting their physical and mental health. George had lost more than 15 pounds in less than 3 weeks. Kathy suffered from severe insomnia and anxiety attacks, and the children showed signs of psychological trauma. It was then that they contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators in the United States. The Warrens arrived at the Amityville house on January 14, 1976, exactly 27 days after the family had moved in. Ed Warren was a self-taught demonologist, and Lorraine Warren claimed to be clairvoyant and a medium. They had investigated thousands of paranormal cases throughout their career, but had never experienced anything as intense as what they found in Amityville. The moment they entered the house, Lorraine Warren claimed to feel an overwhelming, malevolent presence. She described the sensation as if thousands of voices were screaming at the same time, creating an energetic chaos that was almost unbearable. Ed Warren immediately noticed the temperature fluctuations and strange smells that the family had been reporting. During their investigation, the Warrens documented phenomena that defied all logical explanation. They photographed orbs of light that moved intelligently through the house, recorded inexplicable sounds that included human voices speaking in languages they couldn't identify, and registered electromagnetic changes so intense that their electronic equipment broke down permanently. The most dramatic moment of the investigation occurred when Lorraine Warren claimed to have made direct contact with the entities inhabiting the house. According to her testimony, these weren't the spirits of the DeFeo family, but demonic entities that had been attracted to the property by the violent acts committed there. These entities had been feeding on the negative energy of the place for decades, long before the murders occurred. A fascinating aspect of the case is how the narrative has evolved over time. The first accounts focused mainly on physical phenomena like noises, smells, and temperature changes. But as the story became popularized, more dramatic elements were added like demonic apparitions, physical attacks, and direct communication with supernatural entities. This evolution of narrative is common in many famous paranormal cases. Folklore researchers have noted that supernatural stories tend to grow and change, with each retelling incorporating elements from other similar stories and adapting to contemporary cultural expectations about what constitutes an authentic paranormal experience. The psychological aspect of the case has also been extensively analyzed. Psychologists have suggested that the Lutz family may have experienced a form of collective hysteria or suggestion, especially considering the psychological trauma of moving into a house where such a recent and brutal multiple murder had occurred. Do you think that prior knowledge about the murders could have psychologically influenced the family, creating a predisposition to interpret normal events as paranormal? Or do you believe there's something deeper at play? Share your analysis in the comments. The theory of psychological suggestion has merit when we consider that the family knew exactly what had happened in the house before moving in. Knowledge that 6 people had been murdered in their beds could have created an atmosphere of anxiety and fear that made the family hypersensitive to any unusual noise, smell, or sensation. The effects of vicarious trauma could also have played an important role. Although the Lutz family hadn't directly experienced the violence, the simple fact of living in the place where it had occurred could have generated symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, including nightmares, anxiety, and the sensation of being watched or threatened. However, defenders of the case argue that the consistency and specificity of the family's reports suggest they experienced something more than simple psychological suggestion. They point out that the children, especially the youngest, reported details about the apparitions that coincided with information about the DeFeo family that hadn't been published in the media at that time. The Amityville case also raised important questions about the ethics of living in places where tragedies have occurred. Is it morally acceptable to benefit from purchasing a property at a reduced price due to its traumatic history? Do victims of violent crimes have any right to have their places of death treated with special respect? These questions became even more relevant when the house became an unofficial tourist attraction. Despite the current owner's efforts to maintain privacy, hundreds of curious visitors continue to visit the property each year, taking photographs and trying to capture paranormal evidence. This has created an uncomfortable situation where one family's tragedy has become public entertainment. Scientific investigation of the Amityville case has provided valuable lessons about the importance of applying rigorous methodology to paranormal claims. Researchers have learned that contemporary documentation is crucial, that personal testimonies can be inconsistent, and that media pressure can significantly influence how people remember and report their experiences. The case also highlighted the need for independent and skeptical investigators in the study of paranormal phenomena. Most of the initial investigations were conducted by people who already had a predisposition to believe in the supernatural, which could have influenced their conclusions and methodology. Decades after the original events, the Amityville case remains one of the most debated and analyzed paranormal accounts in modern history. It represents a turning point in how society perceives and consumes supernatural stories, marking the beginning of the modern era of paranormal entertainment. Regardless of whether the events were real or fictional, the Amityville case has had a lasting impact on popular culture, paranormal investigation, and our understanding of how supernatural stories are created, propagated, and evolve. It has served as a case study for psychologists, sociologists, folklorists, and paranormal investigators, providing valuable insights into human nature, credulity, and our eternal fascination with the unknown. What do you think after learning this entire story? Do you believe the Lutz family really experienced paranormal phenomena in Amityville? Or do you think it was all an elaborate hoax? Have you changed your mind during the course of this video? Your perspective is very important to me, so please share it in the comments. And if you found this video interesting and want me to analyze more famous paranormal cases with the same level of detail, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. The mystery of Amityville may never be completely solved, but that's precisely what makes it so fascinating and enduring in our collective imagination. Lorraine described having seen a particularly powerful entity that manifested as a humanoid figure over 7 feet tall, completely covered in shadows and with bright red eyes. This entity, according to the Warrens, was the leader of a group of lesser demons that had taken control of the house. The entity communicated telepathically with Lorraine, threatening her and telling her that the Lutz family belonged to them now. The Warrens performed several purification and protection rituals, but the entities violently resisted these attempts. During one of the rituals, Ed Warren was physically attacked by invisible forces that left scratch marks on his arms and chest. Several objects were thrown through the air, directly at the investigators, and temperatures in the house dropped to the point where their breath became visible. Do you believe there are supernatural forces capable of physically attacking people? Or do you think there must be rational explanations for this type of phenomena? Share your opinion in the comments. The situation reached its climax on January 28, 1976. That night, according to the Lutz family's testimony, all paranormal manifestations intensified simultaneously. The doors throughout the house opened and closed violently for hours, creating a deafening racket. The screams and moans they had been hearing sporadically became a constant chorus of tormented voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. George Lutz described having seen hundreds of red eyes glowing from every dark corner of the house. These eyes moved and blinked, following every movement of the family. Kathy reported that she felt as if thousands of invisible hands were touching her simultaneously, pulling at her clothes and hair. The children woke up screaming all at the same time, claiming that their imaginary friends had told them they had to leave the house that very night or something terrible would happen to them. The last straw was when George found his dog, Harry, behaving completely abnormally. The animal, which had always been docile and friendly, was growling and barking toward the basement with an aggressiveness it had never shown before. When George went down to investigate, he found the dog standing in front of the wall where he had discovered the hidden room, with its hair standing on end and eyes completely dilated with terror. At that moment, George clearly heard a male voice whisper in his ear, "Leave now or join us forever." The voice was so real and so close that George could feel the cold breath on his neck. Without hesitating for another second, he ran upstairs and told his family to pack only the essentials. In less than an hour, the Lutz family had abandoned the house, leaving behind all their belongings, including furniture, clothes, and family memories. They never returned to the Amityville house, not even to collect their belongings. Everything they had built and bought for their new home stayed there, as if it were an involuntary offering to the forces that had taken control of the place. The family moved to San Diego, California, where they began a new life, but the aftermath of their experience in Amityville followed them for the rest of their lives. The Lutz story quickly became a media phenomenon when they decided to tell their experience publicly. Writer Jay Anson wrote a book based on their testimonies titled The Amityville Horror, which became an immediate bestseller. The book was subsequently adapted to film in 1979, creating a movie franchise that continues to this day. However, the credibility of the story was seriously questioned when several independent investigators began analyzing the family's claims. Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney, William Weber, claimed that he and the Lutz family had invented the entire story during a casual conversation with the intention of creating a lucrative book. According to Weber, they had sat around a bottle of wine and created the supernatural elements of the story to make the case more interesting. What do you think about this controversy? Do you believe the Lutz family really experienced paranormal phenomena, or do you think it was all an elaborate hoax to gain fame and money? Your opinion is very important to me, so don't forget to leave it in the comments. Skeptics pointed out several inconsistencies in the Lutz statements. For example, there was no physical evidence of the damage that the paranormal entities had supposedly caused. The house showed no signs of the broken doors, damaged windows, or wall marks that the family had reported. Additionally, weather records from the time showed that outdoor temperatures during January 1976 had been unusually warm, which contradicted claims about extreme cold inside the house. Another point of controversy was the fact that the Lutz family never allowed independent investigators to fully examine the house while they lived there. All paranormal investigations, including the Warrens, were conducted in a controlled manner and without supervision from skeptical scientists who could objectively verify the phenomena. Investigators also questioned the timing of the story. The Lutz family had bought the house for $80,000, a considerable sum for 1975, and had invested additional money in renovations and furniture. Economically, it didn't make sense for them to abandon everything due to paranormal phenomena, especially considering that George Lutz had expressed skepticism about the supernatural before moving into the house. On the other hand, defenders of the case pointed out that the Lutz family never significantly benefited from the story. Although the book and movies generated millions of dollars, the family received relatively little money compared to the total profits. Additionally, the experience had negative consequences for them, including years of media harassment, legal lawsuits, and the social stigma of being known as the Amityville hoaxers. George Lutz, until his death in 2006, consistently maintained his version of events. In multiple interviews over the years, he never changed the fundamental details of his story and always expressed frustration at accusations that he had made it all up. Kathy Lutz, who died in 2004, also maintained her testimony until the end of her life. The Warrens, for their part, always defended the authenticity of the Amityville case. Ed Warren, who died in 2006, considered this case one of the most significant of his career. Lorraine Warren, who died in 2019, continued giving lectures about Amityville and maintained that the demonic entities they had encountered in the house were real and extremely dangerous. Subsequent investigations revealed that the Amityville house had a problematic history even before the DeFeo family murders. Historical records showed that several Previous owners had reported strange phenomena, including inexplicable noises, temperature changes, and the sensation of being watched. Some had sold the property after relatively short periods of time, citing an uncomfortable atmosphere in the house. A particularly intriguing detail was the discovery that the property had been partially built over an old Native American cemetery. 18th century records showed that the area had been used as a burial ground by local tribes for generations. According to the beliefs of many cultures, building over sacred places can trigger paranormal activity, especially if burials were disturbed during construction. Do you know any stories about constructions built over ancient cemeteries? Do you believe this can really influence the paranormal activity of a place? Tell us about your experience or knowledge on this topic in the comments. The Amityville house changed hands several times after the Lutz family abandoned it. Curiously, none of the subsequent owners reported significant paranormal experiences. Some lived there for years without incidents, which added more fuel to the debate about the authenticity of the original claims. Skeptics argued that this proved the phenomena had been invented, while believers suggested that the entities might have calmed down after getting what they wanted, expelling the Lutz family. The current owners of the house have maintained a low profile and rarely speak publicly about their experience living there. They have changed the house's address and made significant modifications to the exterior structure to discourage curious tourists who continue visiting the place decades after the original events. The Amityville case also had a significant impact on popular culture and the field of paranormal investigation. It inspired dozens of books, movies, documentaries, and television programs. Each new adaptation added dramatic elements that weren't in the original story, creating a mythology that expanded far beyond the events reported by the Lutz family. Its movies, in particular, introduced elements like demonic possessions, supernatural physical transformations, and extreme violence that were never part of the family's original testimony. These cinematic additions have influenced public perception of the case, causing many people to confuse the fictional elements of the movies with the events actually reported. Paranormal investigators have studied the Amityville case for decades, using increasingly sophisticated technology to try to find evidence of supernatural activity. Audio recordings, infrared photographs, electromagnetic measurements, and thermal analyses of the property have been conducted. The results have been inconsistent, with some investigators reporting anomalies and others finding nothing out of the ordinary.